Welcome to your NEWSMAX Daily for Thursday, September 26, 2024, the 270th day of the year and National Pancake Day in the U.S. of A. Yes, sir. Millions of Americans in Florida, Georgia, and along the Panhandle bracing for the arrival of Hurricane Helene, expected to make landfall on the east side of the Florida Panhandle tonight as a Category 3 or maybe even 4 storm with winds of up to 130 miles per hour and massive storm surge.
I got a bad feeling about this one.
Hopefully I have a home to come back to.
I hope when we come back, our house is still the same as it was, as we left it.
Mandatory evacuations are underway as the National Weather Service calls it catastrophic and or potentially unsurvivable. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis.
You're going to have both wind and water hazards from this storm. Here in the Tallahassee region in the Big Bend, almost every run and model agrees that this storm, the eye of the storm, is coming in this region. Remember, you hide from wind, but you run from the water.
President Biden was briefed on the hurricane yesterday and already approved an emergency disaster declaration for Florida. Once Helene makes landfall, it's going to push into Georgia and the Carolinas and maybe even further north of that. Flooding expected all along the way. President Biden returned to the White House late last night from the UN in New York, where he had that sign line meeting with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelenskyy. And guess who President Biden is meeting with at the White House today? You guessed it, Zelenskyy. I mean, did the guy fly on Air Force One with the president back to the White House? At this point, does someone other than a Republican say, what in the world is going on with these two, right? Let's start with Governor Mike Huckabee, the huckster, on Wake Up America with Rob Finnerty.
Let me ask you about Ukrainian President Zelenskyy and his, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, is not at the UN this week because he's got a lot going on in Israel right now. I feel like Zelensky's been here. I feel like he visited Disney. He's been here since, the weekend, basically campaigning for Kamala Harris, traveling around in a United States Air Force C-17 cargo plane. He went to Pennsylvania to a munitions factory, and Governor Shapiro was there autographing bombs that are going to be used by the Ukrainians to kill Russians. And then President Zelenskyy went out and said that J.D. Vance was too radical. He's quoted in the New Yorker saying that J.D. Vance is too radical and that he should brush up on his history of the Second World War before he talks about how the war in Ukraine should end. Then, and here's Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, signing these missiles, these bombs, with Bob Casey in the background, shaking hands with Zelenskyy. I want to get your reaction to that. What it says to you that a foreign leader is now interfering in our elections, essentially campaigning for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz in a battleground state.
Yeah. I mean, it's just bizarre. When have we ever seen this? Donald Trump has been accused of, having Putin on his side. Well, Putin is actually hoping for Kamala Harris. This is odd. You've got people on both sides of the war supporting Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. Why? Because they know Trump is a strong president. But I think it's outrageous that Zelenskyy, who has had billions of dollars from the United States, would inject himself into the American election. He really should sit this one out. And even if he does have an opinion, he needs to shut up and keep it to himself. He has no business trying to tell Americans how to vote. But the fact that he is telling Americans that he wants Kamala Harris might be a good reason for people to vote for Donald Trump. This is classic interference in an election. I wonder, where's Liz Cheney? Is she going to demand some hearings with her old colleagues in Congress about the intervention and the collusion and the injection of foreign influence in our elections? I doubt it. That's the hypocrisy that we face today. It's why Donald Trump needs to be elected.
That's Mike Huckabee, who also shared an interesting take on the election.
Do you think, and I've seen these yard signs that say Harris Walz, obviously, and I'm like that. I mean, to me, it's the most obvious decision right now, November the 5th, who you should vote for. But, Governor, do you think that the reluctant Trump voter, those people that in polite company at whatever, cocktail parties wouldn't admit to voting for Donald Trump? We saw it certainly in 2016, and it existed in 2020. I don't know. I've met, and I live in a blue state, but I've met people that have told me they are going to become first-time Trump voters in 2024. I don't know if that same reluctance exists right now like we've seen in the past.
Well, I certainly hope that people are just assessing the situation for themselves. I can't imagine that they like what they see and they have any memory at all, unless they're gone full Joe Biden and can't remember life 4 years ago. They surely will remember that the economy was good. The average American family, Rob, they've lost $29,000 of spendable income. That's a huge amount. That's money they don't have thanks to the policies that have led to record inflation, higher prices, immigration that is out of control. This is an administration that has taken this country right off the road and into the ditch. So let's hope that people just think through this very carefully for themselves and then look at it from the world perspective.
Yeah.
Our world is on fire. It wasn't when Donald Trump was president. They've got to look at that realistically.
Former presidential candidate and Governor Mike Huckabee. The only problem with that is he said people need to think for themselves. That is a big ask, Governor. So Biden is back at the White House today, but the UN General Assembly is continuing in New York. More from Rob Schmitt.
Welcome to Rob Schmitt Tonight. The United Nations convening its General Assembly this week. This once great organization, now corrupted and totally ruined, now mostly exists to amplify and validate some of the most toxic governments and dictators all around the world. At the UN, the Saudis chair the Commission on Women's Rights, and China is on the Human Rights Council, so that's an indicator of where they are. The fact the headquarters is in Midtown Manhattan is a national embarrassment and has been for a long time. And this week, the UN casually welcomed the president of Iran to speak, as Iran has been actively working to assassinate Donald Trump. Masoud Pezeshkian is his name, and he actually laid out exactly why his country is working to assassinate Trump as Trump runs to be our next president, and he did so in the comfort of New York City.
Iran agreed to the highest unprecedented level of nuclear oversight in return for recognition of our rights and the lifting of sanctions within the framework of the JCPOA. Trump's unilateral withdrawal from the agreement manifested a threat-ridden approach in politics and a coercion-driven strategy in the economic domain.
And so now it's time to kill him. Simply put, Iran had allies inside the Obama State Department that dumped billions into their lap in exchange for a feeble nuclear deal that they could easily cheat. Then Trump came along and destroyed one of the worst American deals in history, bankrupted a regime that sows terror and chaos throughout the world. During Trump's term, we saw headlines like, thanks to Trump, the mullahs are going bankrupt. And Pezeshkian, along with his UN enablers, are furious that America was no longer dumb enough to fund Iran's terrorism in exchange for John Kerry's nuclear deal. So now, of course, they must kill Trump. One day before Thomas Crooks shot Trump in the head in Butler, Pennsylvania, a Pakistani man working directly under Iran's influence was arrested for plotting to kill Trump. On Truth Social, the former president writing, moves were already made by Iran that didn't work out, but they will try again. Not a good situation for anyone. I am surrounded by more men, guns, and weapons than I have ever seen before. Isn't that a statement from the former president? And he spoke about it today.
Meanwhile, we have the president of Iran in our country this week. We have large security forces guarding him, and yet they're threatening our former president and the leading candidate to become the next president of the United States. Certainly a strange set of circumstances.
Strange to say the least. And as Iran works to kill Trump and enjoys the United Nations summit, and Vladimir Putin enjoys another meek Democrat State Department that has allowed him to invade Ukraine once again, here's how top Democrats sound about this issue.
And it is absolutely well known that these dictators and autocrats are rooting for you to be president again because they're so clear they can manipulate you with flattery and favors.
The vicious autocrats of Russia, the police state theocrats of Iran, the totalitarian communist billionaire bureaucrats of China, North Korea, and all their corrupt oligarchs and plutocrats seek to destroy the very idea of human rights and political freedom. The tyrants have something else in common. Donald Trump. He loves them all, and they love him back. He loves them because he envies their total control over their societies, and they love him because they know they can manipulate and control him.
Mindless sound bites meant to sway the very bottom of the barrel voters out there. For those of us, though, that are able to think, it is quite clear the bad actors of the world are terrified of Trump's return, an unpredictable American president who refuses to tolerate all of their nonsense. That is, if he can survive until this election.
Rob Schmitt is the host of Rob Schmitt Tonight, 7 o'clock Eastern, a must-watch NewsMax program. This week's bipartisan Senate hearings on the Trump assassination attempts found that security failures before the Butler, Pennsylvania rally were foreseeable, preventable, and directly related to the events resulting in the assassination attempt on July 13th. Let me remind you, the shooter, I don't like to give them any credibility by saying their name. The shooter got on the roof of a building, fired 8 shots at President Trump, wounding him, killing a rally attendee, right? Corey Comprator, wounding 2 others before he was killed by a Secret Service sniper. Rob Finnerty spoke with former Secret Service agent and DHS advisor Charles Marino.
Brand new right now, the Senate report on the July 13th Butler, Pennsylvania assassination attempt was just released, and we're just looking it over. But it does say that the lead agent in charge of that rally in Butler, PA, back in July was made aware of, quote, credible intelligence of a threat against President Trump. He did not pass that on to supervisors and still let Trump take the stage. What do you make of that?
Inexcusable. I mean, I just cannot believe the breakdown in information sharing and overall communications that took place in both the lead up and on that day in Butler, Pennsylvania. And I don't think many in the Secret Service can understand it either. People need to be held accountable. This is serious work, and they need to get this right 100% of the time. And this kind of stuff that we're reading in the report just cannot happen.
Yesterday, the president of Iran, Charles, addressed the United Nations. Joe Biden did not deny the Iranian president the opportunity to travel to America and then be protected by taxpayer-funded security agents and members of the Secret Service protecting the Iranian president while there are active threats against Donald Trump's life from Iran and the leadership in Iran. Charles, why was he given the platform yesterday? Why was he not denied the ability to address the UN, given what's going on between the Iran and the United States and the credible threats against Donald Trump's life from Iran?
Yeah, look, President Biden continues to make the wrong decisions over and over and over again. And this is no surprise. He just cannot get it right, no matter how apparent it is. In this type of situation, both in the Middle East and what's going on with former President Trump, the Iranian president should have been denied access from arriving in the United States. Once they say yes, that he's able to come into the country and speak at the UN, the Secret Service is going to be tasked with protecting the Iranian president as the official head of the country, no different than the other 139 leaders that are coming into the United States to be protected. But in this type of situation, especially when you incorporate the nuclear issue and how close Iran is reportedly to obtaining a weapon, this was not the right time for this president to be able to come into the country and further incite.
All right, Charles, you're looking at, these are protests outside the 5-star hotel that the Iranian president was staying at last night. These are the protests there. So just to connect the dots here, and stop me if I'm wrong, but the U.S. Secret Service was forced to allocate resources that could be allocated to Donald Trump to New York City to protect the person that wants Donald Trump dead. Am I right there?
Exactly right.
Okay. Do we not see any problem with that?
It's the contradiction of all contradictions. And again, this is a weak administration, an administration that knows nothing other than appeasement. They refuse to put their foot down against our adversaries. They'll willingly do it against our allies, but they won't do it against our adversaries. I mean, for the past 3.5 years, we've seen this play in and day out, and it's unbelievable. And yes, essentially, Secret Service resources are being tasked with protecting the person, in part trying to kill former President Trump.
Former Secret Service agent and former Department of Homeland Security advisor Charles Marino on Wake Up America. Laura Trump, daughter-in-law to the former president and Republican National Convention co-chair, also weighed in on the release of yesterday's Senate report.
And now we know the extent of which he's been briefed about other threats, and the failures have not been remedied, apparently. Your biggest takeaway from this report today that was released, Laura?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's upsetting. You're right. This is, to some people, he's a guy running for president. I think we learned, maybe it was a few days ago, that 28% of Democrats are maybe quietly hoping that an assassination attempt against Donald Trump is successful, which is so concerning and sick and unbelievable, truly, Bianca, in the United States of America. But I think what we've seen is that clearly there were epic failures. Clearly, the more information we get, I think the more concerned people continue to be. Now, I was at the rally. You just showed a video there with my daughter, Carolina, and my son, Luke. Eric and I took them to my hometown of Wilmington, North Carolina, with my father-in-law over the weekend. I can tell you the security was incredibly heightened. You see the bulletproof glass right there. And from the start to the finish of the rally, our travel experience, they are definitely taking things very seriously now. But it is concerning that you have, a foreign actor like Iran trying to assassinate Donald Trump, trying to influence an election. I think it's very clear that these are individuals who do not want to see Donald Trump back in that White House for a whole host of different reasons. But this is the United States. We cannot stand for things like this. And I'm going to give kudos to the current Secret Service agents. They're definitely on top of things right now.
We're happy to hear that. And we know there'll be another rally in Butler coming up on October the 5th. But it does seem like they're not individually taking blame. There's no one that's been let go. They keep blaming funding and resources. And that doesn't seem like things that can be fixed overnight the way our government and bureaucracy works. So ultimately, it does seem like there's still exposure here if you look at some of these underlying facts coming out today.
Yeah, I think that's 100% true. And I'll tell you, as the daughter-in-law of this man, I constantly think about this. My husband, Eric, and I think about it and sadly talk about it all the time. And, I really hope that we see some accountability of some variety here, because it's very concerning that this was ever allowed to happen. And you're right. I think that the idea that we're just going to move on and no one is going to be held responsible doesn't sit right, certainly with me and with a lot of Americans. So, look, we're going to have to wait and see what happens. But I do hope that at the end of this, we get a clear picture of what happened, where every single failure was, and someone truly has to be held accountable.
Laura Trump on Newsline with Bianca De La Garza, who pointed out the continued rhetoric of the left.
This is Harris Biden Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo right here on MSNBC using this type of rhetoric just yesterday.
What he says is the opposite. It's just another lie. Like, how did we get here? Let's extinguish him for good. We have an answer. We have a remarkably talented candidate who is sincere, who's pragmatic, who's open. Let's just get it done.
I mean, they're saying extinguish. I mean, this is the type of rhetoric that they just can't help themselves. And this is from an administration official here, Laura. I don't think it's going to stop. So you're just going to have to continue on, I guess, and just pray and hope. What will be your thoughts in the coming, 42 days, 41 days here as you kind of know that this is going to be somewhat of a ever-present threat for you and for your father-in-law?
Well, I'll tell you, whenever you have to resort to what you just heard there in order to try and get people to vote for your candidate, it probably means you have a really bad candidate. And I think the Democrats are well aware of that. They're having a hard time selling Kamala Harris to the American people. She is a horrible candidate in terms of the fact that not a single person voted for her. Think back to whenever she ran for president the first time around. She had to drop out before her home state of California even voted. It's hard to sell radical ideas and bad policies. And 4 more years of the detrimental effect of Kamala Harris in the White House to the American people. So if this is where they're headed and this is how they're going to play things over the next 41 days, I think they're going to have a hard time convincing the American people that they should vote for Kamala Harris. We, on the other hand, are, of course, going to highlight what Donald Trump did while he was president, continue to talk about the ways he's going to make your life better, put more money in your pocket, secure our southern border, keep crime out of your communities, and have peace agreements again instead of wars breaking out around the world. That is how we will continue to operate.
Okay, that comment cannot be glanced over. That cannot be just another passing soundbite, all right? This is one to keep in the files. This is one that we will need to go back to and reference many times. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo saying, let's extinguish him for good. There is nothing else that means. She could have said, keep him out of office, this is why Harris must win, or we can't let him win, etc., etc. There's like 100 things she could have said, but she said, let's extinguish him for good. Remember when President Biden, the Democrats, and the mainstream media were all losing their minds about Donald Trump saying there will be a bloodbath in the car industry if Biden wins re-election? They still bring that up, even though it is clear that he was talking about the auto industry. But they put that in there with Charlottesville, January 6th, and everything else. Let's extinguish him. Well, let's see what any of them will say, if anything, about that. Last week, you may recall, Greg Kelly talked about how conservative media needs to keep sounding the alarm. They need to keep pounding the table, right? That was featured in the NEWSMAX Daily. This would be something to keep sounding the alarm about. If someone brings it up, they'll probably write it off as a poor choice of words or something like that. Speaking of which, there's a lot of talk today about Vice President Harris's cupcake interview on MSNBC with Stephanie Ruhle last night, who just a couple of days ago said this about President Trump.
I just said I'm not going to vote for her. Kamala Harris is not running for perfect. She's running against Trump. We have two choices. And so there are some things you might not know her answer to. And in 2024, unlike 2016 for a lot of the American people, we know exactly what Trump will do, who he is, and the kind of threat he is to democracy.
There it is again. Threat to democracy. As Rob Finnerty pointed out earlier, the Biden-Harris administration is using resources that we were told we do not have to protect the leader of Iran, the world's leading sponsor of terror, right now in New York. It doesn't matter what Kamala Harris or anyone else's policies are, or if they even have policies. Don't worry about that now. You must vote for them so Donald Trump does not win. And this is Vice President Harris in last night's interview on MSNBC explaining why she chose Tim Walz as her running mate.
Probably the biggest gut decision I've made most recently is to choose my running mate. Yeah. There were lots of good, incredible candidates. And ultimately, that came down to a gut decision.
Well, that would have to make you wonder how she is going to make decisions as the president and how good those decisions are going to be. Let's wrap it up with the other big story of the day. New York City Mayor Eric Adams has been indicted.
So I never thought we'd get a mayor in New York worse than Bill de Blasio was for the city. But the largest city in the country, New York, might be dealing with just that right now in Eric Adams, whose days could be numbered, as you said. The exact accusations remain unclear. We'll find out more this morning. But they're believed to be connected to the Turkish government illegally funneling alleged money into his campaign in exchange for approval of a new Turkish consulate right here in New York City. Eric Adams never registered under FARA as a foreign agent. Adams claims that the feds are prosecuting him over the migrant crisis. Take a listen to what he said just over a year ago about the Biden-Harris administration's handling of the migrant crisis and what that's done to New York City.
We're getting no support on this national crisis. This issue will destroy New York City. Destroy New York City. We're getting 10,000 migrants a month.
Okay. For more, let's welcome in political analyst and best-selling author Mark Halperin. Mark, good morning. Good to have you back on this morning. Just take us through where you think this goes with Democrat Mayor Eric Adams in New York.
everybody's entitled to the presumption of innocence, but this has been a long-running controversy, edging towards scandal. Resignations from his administration, other officials under investigation, no fewer reportedly than 4 probes into Adams. There are many people in this city who have been suspicious of him as someone who would toe the line and adhere to the rules and laws of the United States before he even was elected mayor, and skepticism that he would be able to do the job without getting into trouble. And if he is indicted today, as everybody expects, I assume he'll be out of office by the end of the year, maybe even much sooner, and this will be a wide open race to govern this city.
Do you think he resigns then? Do you think he leaves willingly, or do you think he's pushed out? I know that he's surrendering to authorities early next week.
Well, there is a way for the governor of the state to try to remove him, but it's a pretty complicated process. I suspect he thinks he can hold on to power and use that as a bargaining chip and then sort of plea bargain with prosecutors. But my guess is that the city, its federal, state, local officials will all en masse call for him to resign once the indictment's unsealed. And I suspect that he will.
Yeah, and, look, New York is one of these states that is a very, very blue state, like California and Massachusetts, I suppose. But we keep hearing about the lieutenant governor down in North Carolina, Mark Robinson, and how that could impact Donald Trump in a battleground state. And if Eric Adams is forced out before Election Day, what would that mean for this state? We're not talking about Buffalo or Albany here. We're talking about one of the biggest cities in the Western Hemisphere, the biggest in America. And if the mayor is forced out, the Democrat mayor is forced out before Election Day because of, by the way, the same scandal that Hunter Biden was accused of, not registering as a foreign agent. We'll find out more when the indictment is unsealed later this morning. Does that mean that New York could be back in play? Because many say that if New York City weren't a part of New York, New York's a red state. If you go north and west into the state, travel to the Finger Lakes, travel into the Hudson Valley, there's a lot of Trump signs up in those areas. Could this put New York back on the map for Donald Trump? And also, could we see a Republican take over in New York City? It's been a while since that's happened.
956-word question, 3-word answer. No and no.
Why not, Mark?
Mark, give us the
Why could a Republican not become mayor?
The Republican become mayor, I think could happen. Because that's just a knee-jerk reaction to a scandal like this, right?
Well, I think it could in the abstract. The city registration is like 7 or 8 to 1 Democrat. I think Andrew Cuomo will get in the race and it'll be very formidable as a Democrat. He'll raise a lot of money, have a lot of political support. And I just don't know of the Republican who would be able to win with the resources to beat somebody like that.
Political analyst Mark Halperin on this morning's Wake Up America with Rob Finnerty and Charlotte McBride. Andrew Cuomo, by the way, may get indicted himself as the congressional panel investigating the COVID-19 pandemic has released evidence suggesting witness tampering and obstruction of justice by Cuomo. Maybe Chris Cuomo should run. I mean, he'd be sacrificing a lot of money from the media, but I could actually see people voting for him. By the way, Vice President Harris is also back at the White House today and will be delivering remarks alongside President Biden this afternoon on gun violence. Republican vice presidential nominee J.D. Vance made a stop in my hometown of Orlando, Florida yesterday for a private fundraising event, which I'm sure raised a lot of money. Mandatory donations for the luncheon, I got to see the invite, ranged from $5,000 per couple to attend all the way up to $100,000 for a host committee. On Wall Street, stocks opened well into the green this morning. Things are off and running. And if you're a baseball fan, some history today. The Oakland A's will play their last game at the Oakland Coliseum this afternoon before moving to Sacramento temporarily and then Las Vegas once a stadium is built in Vegas. The Coliseum was the place of Catfish Hunter's 1968 perfect game, Ricky Henderson's stolen base record, Jose Canseco, and more. Be sure to keep up with all of the news all day long on Newsmax, Newsmax.com, and Newsmax Plus. Simply go to NewsmaxPlus.com to get signed up. Get all of your favorite shows like The Record with Greta Van Susteren, Rob Schmitt Tonight, Carl Higbee on Frontline, Newsline with Bianca De La Garza, and more. I'm Tony Marino. Thank you, as always, for checking out the NEWSMAX Daily podcast. Share it with your friends and family. Make sure you subscribe on whatever podcast platform you're listening to. I would appreciate that. And keep on fighting the good fight.
News breaks every minute, every day. You need the app, the NEWSMAX app. Find it free on your smartphone store. Then watch us anytime, anywhere.
Information. Truth is freedom. Is